A former police lieutenant and police union president, who also happens to be my husband, speaks out about the hypocrisy and lack of leadership surrounding the Minneapolis Police Department. Next. Bob Kroll is my guest. Bob, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Full disclosure, I am married to Bob Kroll. Yes, Bob is my husband, just to get that out of the way. But as a former police union leader and president in Minneapolis, you've had to deal with weak leadership and hypocrisy before. You've been retired for years now, but of course you're still being blamed for just about everything. So while police leaders and politicians seem to be boasting about making progress, it seems as if nothing has changed, especially given recent events, which is why we wanted to talk to you about all of this. Just last week, law enforcement agents from several federal agencies were conducting a cartel-linked investigation in Minneapolis. We know now that 900 pounds of meth was recovered as part of that investigation. In response, Police Chief Brian O'Hara called the leaders of these federal agencies tone deaf. But then he posed for a photo in front of their helicopter. Then, even though ICE was not rounding up illegals, Assistant Police Chief Katie Blackwell nonetheless issued a memo to MPD officers about not cooperating with immigration enforcement. In her memo, Assistant Chief Blackwell said, quote, "No MPD shall respond to any immigration enforcement related activity. No personnel shall assist with crowd control at an immigration enforcement activity." Basically, don't cooperate with ICE. So, Bob, what kind of message does this send to police and the public?
It sends the wrong message entirely, and I think just to back up, people see me as a union president over the years. I think they forget that I was actually a police supervisor for a large majority of my career. I was a sergeant for over a dozen years, a lieutenant for over a dozen years on patrol and in SWAT. So I actually know from the inside what police leadership is all about. And the message they sent completely blew it, not just in Minneapolis, but it sends a message. People are watching Minneapolis for what's happened here over the years, and we're seeing this in LA right now. But when you break down what occurred in Minneapolis, you had ICE agents doing their job, and we later learned that they were taking felony suspects off the street in a major trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, drug scheme, and they did a great job in doing it, and they're out there trying to do their job, and false narrative went out and they were interfered with by citizens. And the response of the MPD leadership is to not engage and not be the issue. Well, that's not the message you want to send to your officers. That's against the law. Your sworn officers take an oath to uphold the law and enforce the law. And in this instance, you can't pick and choose along political lines. If you've got another agency out there and they're requesting for assistance, you should not have to ask for approval to go do so. And your job is there as a sworn law enforcement officer to go there and effect your duty. Then, after it's all over with, you've got the chief of police and the assistant chief posing with the federal law enforcement's helicopter for a photo op. It's just complete hypocrisy all the way around.
So, Bob, you are no stranger to controversy, but many people, including my critics, have overlooked that you've always advocated for getting the facts, something that also was an issue last week, but before making decisions and drawing conclusions. Of course, you had to be blamed for the George Floyd riots, but what you actually said tells a much different story than what is still being echoed 5 years later in the mainstream media, even after all these years.
Well, if you think back to the Floyd incident and the riots, the only thing I put out is now's not the time to pass judgment. Officers are cooperating with the investigative process. We need to see more video, let this whole thing unfold. And cooler, calmer heads could have helped deter all of the damage. At the end of the day, we had $500 million in damage done to the city of Minneapolis and over 1,500 businesses. And if you would have had leadership come out at that time and ask for calm and say, hey, we're investigating thoroughly, rather than just make it a racial incident and everything that unfolded afterwards, we all would have benefited from that.
So good cops and prosecutors, they do this every day. They get the facts and then they follow them. Why does it, though, nowadays seem to be impossible for police leaders and politicians to avoid rushing to judgment? Is this any way to run a police department or actually make a difference in public safety?
unfortunately, you have police chiefs that are willing to pose and play the part and the role that the politicians in charge of that city want to. And they forget that your job is to not make the laws, but to uphold and enforce the ones that are there. And for Minneapolis to come out now and say, hey, they're still not gonna, they're not gonna support any efforts that are done by ICE. They really blew it last time ICE was in town because it had nothing to do with immigration. It had everything to do with violent crimes, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and they sat on the sidelines. And you hear Tom Homan say oftentimes in several settings, it's much easier to have federal ICE officers take someone out of a county jail peacefully when they've been searched and remove them with the cooperation of those in charge of the county, the city, etc., rather than fighting against their the local law enforcement fighting against federal agents. It makes it more dangerous for all involved when they've got to go and extract these illegal felons, and where, again, they're not doing a blanket search of just people in the country illegally. They're removing the worst of the worst right now. And you're placing everyone in danger. You're placing the ICE agents, local law enforcement, and the community in danger by not just cooperating at the very beginning. If you've got a felon in your jail that's an illegal alien, you should be contacting ICE rather than hiding them from ICE, and we're seeing too much of that.
So looking ahead to a weekend of mass protests, several are planned in Minnesota. Are you hopeful that leaders will learn from past mistakes and stop the sidestepping and scapegoating? Is that even possible at this point?
I'm not hopeful within the city of Minneapolis. You look around last week, they had cooperation. ICE they did 8 different operations. They had no problems in any of the other cities that they were at. They got cooperation from local law enforcement in Minneapolis. They were told, no, don't help. We won't help in the future. So it depends on where they're conducting the operations. I'm hopeful that it would take place that way, but I'm not confident that it will go down that way within the city of Minneapolis, unfortunately.
Bob Kroll, again, just for the record, my husband, because I am married to Bob Kroll. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on all of this.
Thanks for having me.
And that will do it for this episode of Liz Collin Reports. We'll see you next time.